and I will turn the microphone and podium over to Professor Moore.
Well, thank you, Professor Hare. It's wonderful to have you back here. He was our acting dean for several years and helped put this place back in order after a time of turmoil. We're grateful for him. I want to preface my remarks this morning first by saying how grateful I am to be here and to thank Roz and Lucas for organizing a very creative and wonderful conference. I also want to say that this is a very different kind of presentation that I'll be making this morning. My understanding of why I was invited to this wonderful event is based on a conversation actually that Roz and I had of a very personal nature related to my relationship with my father. So I'm going to actually be speaking very personally today about that relationship, and I hope that my comments will be a spark for us to address some of the larger issues of this conference in ways that I hope will be apparent. So again, I will conclude with some general ideas about this, and I speak both clearly as a daughter here in this particular presentation, but also as an educator, which is my profession, and an ethicist. So ultimately, my interest in these topics is rooted largely in how we can create cultures in our schools across the K through higher ed spectrum, as well as in our religious institutions, to help us have better tools to enhance the dignity that Professor Hicks was talking about earlier, so that we can avoid the kind of conflicts and confrontations that she was speaking about this morning that lead to, and based on so much misunderstanding and misrepresentation. So my agenda is a broad one, but through this very personal experience. So thank you for your time in advance. I am a lesbian, feminist, economically privileged, pacifist-leaning Harvard professor. My father is a politically conservative, working-class, World War II veteran who was a macho hunk football star in his youth. My father and I embody the tensions that this conference seeks to explore in all that is implied in the designations Ivy and military. And I hope that our personal story of conflict and resolution may offer some tools for our consideration of these tensions in a broader context. You put up the, thank you. In partnership with my mother, my father has exemplified the American dream of pulling himself up by his bootstraps from poverty to prosperity and as a successful small business owner. He grew up in rural Iowa, the youngest boy of a family of 9 boys, whose father was a line foreman for the railroad and whose mother grew the family food on a plot of land leased to them by the railroad company. She maintained a simple home that didn't have an indoor bathroom until my father's 7th year, and remember, he was the youngest of 9 boys. She was also deeply religious, and through her, the family was heavily involved in the local Christian church, Disciples of Christ. My dad credits his mother's capacity to endure the hardships of poverty and the responsibilities of caring for a large family to her deep and resolute faith in God. My father's memories of his childhood are characterized by spiritual and emotional abundance, coupled with a developing consciousness of their meager material resources. My father was 17 when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and he followed the call of service in defense of his country as an Army recruit. Those were heady, emotional days, and I can only begin to imagine what it must have been like for my father, a poor boy from Iowa, to be offered the opportunities for travel, training, adventure, and patriotic allegiance that military service provided. The realities of war, however, are a far cry from these romanticized notions, as every person who has served in the military and every family member of those who serve knows. Like all soldiers, in every war, he experienced the horrors, hardships, and sacrifices that military service entails. To this day, he rarely speaks about his 5 years of service. When he does, his grave tone reveals an immense inner burden. Thanks to the GI Bill, my dad was able to attend the nearby church-related college in Canton, Missouri. He worked full-time in exchange for room and board and books, and was the first person on either side of his family to attend college, and one of the few to graduate from high school. He met my mother there, married, and graduated with a degree in business, of which he is immensely proud. In the early 1950s, with two infant children, with two of their own infant children, my older brothers, my mother and father took the risk to leave their trailer home in Canton, Missouri. That home was provided by the college where my dad continued to work following his graduation. They had the courage to leave that trailer home in their close proximity to their families to venture to Ann Arbor, Michigan, where my father accepted a job as a manager of supplies in an independently owned college bookstore on the University of Michigan campus. I want to pause here to point out two important dimensions of my father's story. The first has to do with his race and the privileges that were afforded him as a result of his whiteness. Had he been a person of color, he would not have been admitted to the college where he attended, nor would he have been hired in a managerial position at the bookstore. It is also important to note that the cultural and ideological differences between Fort Madison, Iowa, and Canton, Missouri on the one hand, and Ann Arbor, Michigan on the other, are extreme. My parents, however, were committed to wanting to provide a better future for their children than what they perceived was possible in Canton, and my father took solace in knowing that there was a Christian church, Disciples of Christ community, located in the heart of the University of Michigan campus near the bookstore where he worked. He'd hoped that the church would be a cultural link to help him and his family bridge this long divide, and in many ways it was. They moved their family to Ann Arbor, joined the church, and became active members, giving generously of their time as well as their still meager financial resources. As his mother did before him, my father tithed, donating 10% of his earnings to the church. I was born in Ann Arbor, and like my brothers before me, was dedicated as an infant in that church, and was forced by my parents to attend church with them every week and Sunday school following the services. We rebelled to no avail. This was not a negotiable commitment. As much as my father felt a sense of belonging in that Ann Arbor church, he also felt a growing sense of alienation. This religious community was very different than that of his boyhood in Fort Madison, Iowa, and his young adulthood in Canton, Missouri. Whereas both of those communities were socially and theologically very conservative, the Ann Arbor Church was the opposite. In fact, these communities represented the opposite ends of the spectrum encompassed in the Disciples of Christ body, so different that it was hard to conceive that they had in common anything except rituals of the Sunday service and the structures of church governance. These differences were readily apparent to my father when he first joined the church, as evidenced by the church's participation in social justice issues such as the growing civil rights movement. Still, my father felt a sense of belonging, which is important to note as we move through the rest of this story. That church community was able for several years to hold together the tensions in its own community between very conservative members and very progressive ones.